Are you part of the USCMC? How about the 3WE? The WY? The UPP? This is Nightsaber Z42, and welcome to the castle. This is a review of the Alien RPG Colonial Marines Operator's Manual. Let's dive in. So here we have the Colonial Marines Operations Manual. It's a little bit different going on the inside cover where the year has transformed into 2184. Some of the systems are a bit different. There's the absence of some and the inclusion of others, but you still get the four major systems, the UPP, the Three World Empire, the Independent Core Systems Colony, and the United Americas. And it's basically the same thing. It's just a different year, and you have other systems to play around with. The lead writing is still by Andrew Isigaska, who does a tremendous work for the setting, which I am very happy for. And layout-wise, everything is pretty much the same thing. So for the table of contents, you have your columns with the thumb for the spreads. This time there are about 10 different chapters, although the last one is quite big, and we'll get into that a little bit later, and for good reason. So let's get you situated to the core. So just like in the actual core rulebook, there are two different sections throughout the book. You have the player section and the game mother section, and you really actually don't need the core rulebook. You can definitely use this with the starter set if you would like. The first chapter is Welcome to the Core. This is the introduction chapter for the book, and while it doesn't needlessly go into what a role-playing game is, it does give you an overall rundown of what the Colonial Marines are and how they are set up in the universe, because this is definitely a military-style campaign. This is vastly different than, the core, the stuff that you get in the core rulebook. So that's actually really cool. It's super simple, and you probably already know the facts if you're getting this book in the first place, because it is very specific. So really not a whole lot to go over, and a lot of the information presented in this chapter is expanded in later down the line. So overall, a great introduction just to get you situated to, what the Colonial Marines are. So let's talk about the history. So if you're like me, then you definitely like lore. And this chapter has a lot of lore. So first thing to know is the timeline has been greatly expanded, or rather there are more events this time around to fill it out. And while it's not really going over, major plot points that we've seen in the core rulebook, it does expand the military campaigns that we'll see spread throughout the book, like the different seas, the different wars, and things like that. And something that I actually do like this time around is that you get these nice spreads of, some notable events. Now, the history are organized by topic as opposed to just the actual times, although it is in chronological order within those specific topics. But like from growing pains to the 20 parsec limit, it's vastly different than where it picks up and where it ends and stuff like that. So very interesting, and it is a lot of good information if you actually like the lore of the Alien universe. It isn't actually necessary. You might get some inspiration bits, but really probably not from this chapter. It's just to basically see how the other factions came to be and what their disposition towards each other are. But I still did have a lot of fun reading this chapter. So let's get into the organizations. First and foremost, if you have this book, then you obviously know who the Colonial Marines are, but really, who are they? And this section breaks down the particulars of the military body. And something that I actually really do like, because I am definitely not well versed in anything military in real life, I really do like how they break down, different commands like the platoons, section squads, fire teams, and also what the ranks are and who would actually be in charge of those sections. That's actually like probably no brainer for a lot of people, but for me, I actually really dig that they actually have that here because again, I'm not military whatsoever. Not only do you get a breakdown of the United Americas Colonial Marine Corps, but you also get some of the smaller branches from the other organizations. So we have like the Canadian Colonial Armed Forces, the Latin American Colonial Navy. They're just like smaller factions that that are still around, but the bulk of the military out in space is definitely going to be the USCMC. And then, of course, you have some of the other factions like the Three Worlds Empire and how their military is broken up, the ICSC and some of their corporate forces, and the UPP and how they break things down. So, overall, another good chapter of just good information, and it really just explains why of things. Really, probably not a whole lot of inspiration information here, but still, it is a good read, especially if you like the lore bits. By the way, this is the point where I said this is the acronym book because there are just a ton of acronyms in this book, and a lot of the times they don't go back and explain what those acronyms mean after they've introduced it. So, yeah. So let's get into making Marines. For all intents and purposes, this is the character creation for the Colonial Marines. Since this is going to be a military campaign, the options for the careers are greatly expanded. So in the core rulebook, you had a Colonial Marine, just standard Colonial Marine, and then you had the Colonial Marshal. But here, you actually have a specialty. So you have things like the AFV Marine, that's the guy who drives the APC. You have the Assault Marine, the guy who shoots things a lot. You have the Automatic Rifleman, the guy who shoots things a lot, but with a smart gun. You have the Comtech Marine, that's the engineer who fixes things, hacks things, or does anything electronically. You have the CBRN Specialist, these are your hazmat people. When there's a radiation leak, these are the people that you send in to deal with it. You have your dedicated marksmen. These are your sniper dudes. You have the dropship crew chief, the not pilot guy, because there's already a pilot in the core rulebook, but these are the ones who keep maintenance on the ship. You have the hospital corpsman, because that's everybody's best friend, because he's the combat medic, get it? You have the forward observer, the guy who regrets his career choice because he's always going in first. And then you have the rifleman, another guy who shoots things but surprisingly doesn't have ranged combat as a key skill. Okay, whatever. And of course, you have access to any of the core rulebook classes like your pilot, the Colonial Marine, and the Colonial Marshal, if you really want to include those. Something that does stand out are the field events. So this time around, you're fleshing out your career a little bit more by rolling on these events. So you have an event table A, B, and C. So A is for the enlisted, B is for the NCO, and then C is for pilots and crew chiefs. So really, it's just it's creating further fleshing out your backstory by giving you a notable event that happened in your career that you're known for. So a really interesting way that wasn't in the core rulebook and is actually pretty cool here because it just expands, what you can do with your background. This time around, there's only 5 new talents. So you have all-terrain driver, bypass, heavy weapons, hug the dirt, and remote. I'm actually kind of a little bit disappointed that you just get 5 new talents. But then again, my whole thing is if they had included more, would they really be quality talents? I mean, would you actually pick those talents? So I'm glad that we have 5 good talents as opposed to, just regular generic talents. Although I will say that you do have access to generic talents, the general talents from the core rulebook. So that's something that you're going to need if you actually do plan on doing campaign mode here. Although, of course, as we've already mentioned, in cinematic mode, you will always have everything that you need on your character. So the last thing that you do when you're making your Marine is get your gear. And the really cool thing is your gear, well, you're obviously part of a military organization, so gear is already paid for by taxpayers. So you get basic gear, and then you get bonus gear. So you get to choose either from list A and from list B. So you get one item from list A and one item from list B. And then your specialty also grants you special equipment. So like the AFV Marine gets the M41A pulse rifle and electronic tools. So really cool way of further diversifying your gear amongst your Marines, which is actually, it's almost required, especially if you have different things that you're doing, your skills and stuff like that. So let's talk about gear. So remember when I was doing my review on the core rulebook and I said that gear would definitely be expanded in the Colonial Marines Operator's Manual? Yeah, that's definitely true. Weapons are crazily expanded in this book. You have more options for weapons, and the really cool thing that I absolutely like about this is that some of the weapons are actually further diversified by the faction that uses it. So like the Norcom semi-automatic pistol, that's used by the UPP. The Wayland semi-automatic electrostatic pistol, that's used by the ICSC. So you have more options for weapons here, and it does greatly expand to heavy weapons as well. And then you also have things like explosives and different types of ammunition for like RPGs and grenades and stuff like that, which is also really cool. You also do get some more armor, like the battle dress utilities. Protective gear, you have the life vest, cold weather parka, military grade hazmat suit. You got some body armor like the ballistic helmet, riot vest. So you get more options to basically make your Marine a little bit different than just wearing one of the 5 different armors that were in the core rulebook. So really cool. And of course, all of the equipment is, military grade. So these are going to be things that your normal type people, like your truckers or your colonists, aren't going to really have access to unless they acquired it illegally. Or maybe you actually come across, some dead Marines and stuff like that, and you loot their gear. You might actually come across some of this stuff as one of those types of players. So vehicles have also been greatly expanded here. So for vehicles, rather, you have access to ground vehicles as opposed to just the one that was in the last one in the core rulebook. You actually have a defense artillery gun, which is actually really cool. Tanks, some more carriers, drop ships, attack drop ships, some interceptors, really cool. You have way more vehicle weapons this time around. And spacecraft, which, same deal. The pictures are all in different places. And I absolutely love the artwork for the spacecrafts. Just how different they look because they are from different factions. It really gives you a lot of flavor here. Bougainville, nice. And that's pretty much it. So, really, if you like more stuff, and if you're looking for more stuff, it really depends on what kind of a campaign that you plan on playing around with. But this option definitely gives you a lot more stuff to play around with. So let's talk about the Marine campaign. This chapter is all about how to run a military-style campaign. There is a sample ship that you can use, the USS Tam-Itam. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And it does give you an overall layout, which is absolutely cool because I just love, I think that sci-fi maps are few and rare unless you actually know where to go. Like Hero Maps on Drive Through RPG has has some stock, but there really isn't a whole lot. And I really do like just how these maps look. And I'm definitely planning on, taking them and maybe plotting them into my other sci-fi games. So these are just really, really cool. It gives you information on the squad, who's who. These are basically NPCs, but as an NPC, if one of your player characters dies, you can just give them one of these NPCs, and there you go. You have things like how those fire teams function, like what their roles are and stuff like that. There's also some really good advice on the chain of command, where you're not, just because you might be the leader of a squad doesn't mean that the other players rather, just sit around and listen to you. This is a cooperative game, so the players have a lot of input as to what the team does. But as an individual, the player kind of runs their own character. So that's some really good advice here, where you just kind of forget the chain of command just to have some input on the overall story building, and that's a really good advice to give, especially in this type of a campaign. There's of course some expansions for combat. The NPCs will probably never be used in a firefight, just so that your actual PCs have some time to shine, which is, that's actually really good, and it makes sense. There's also rules for cross-country movement, and also setting up ambushes, because as a Marine, you're probably going to be doing that quite a bit. If the Xenomorphs can do it, then why can't the Marines? So there you go. And it has all sorts of information on setting up the ambush and even being ambushed. And sometimes you can actually call in for fire support from your ship out in space. So yeah, don't do that all the time because reasons. Of course, if you plan on doing a military-style campaign, then you're going to need to do missions. And of course, you can always roll to see what your Marine's next mission is going to be. And those different mission types are broken down here. So you have things like assault, recon, defense, sabotage and raid, combat patrol, search and rescue. It just keeps going on. And that's actually really cool because it just gives you ideas of what, a typical Marine does out in space. So that's really cool. You also have access to downtime times, because your Marines aren't just going to be going from one combat to the next combat, because why? That doesn't really happen in real life. They do have some downtime, and there are some squad downtime events and some personal downtime events. And by far the best thing in this entire book, or this entire series of products, is the recipe for company cornbread. Perhaps if you've seen Aliens and know that reference, but the recipe, we finally have it. Let's do it. Let's talk about the systems and bases. So when I was first reading through this book, when I actually came across this chapter, I kind of paused for a moment and thought, hey, isn't this in the wrong place? Shouldn't this be like right after organizations? But actually, this is the first chapter for the game mother. Actually, this is not the first chapter, but it is for the game mother. Some secrets are exposed, but we'll get into that a little bit later. What you have here is pretty much the same as the Systems and Planets chapter in the core rulebook. There's just more systems here, and the layout is very similar. One of the things that really kind of baffles my mind is the Alpha Bootis system. So if you've never actually read up on expanded alien lore, the Alpha Bootis system is very notable because this is actually where the intelligent life, or the intelligent humanoids, are. So you have I think they're called the Arcturus, or that's the name of the Arcturians, and they're basically like humans. And when I read this for the first time, I was like, wait, what? There's actually other aliens other than xenomorphs, neomorphs, engineers, and humans here? And yes, apparently so. There's Arcturians. And so I was like, I actually just rewatched Aliens over the Halloween weekend, and they actually mentioned Arcturians in the movie, and I never actually ever picked up on that. I thought that just meant like another colony, and so wow, so that's actually really cool. Arcturians are a thing in Alien universe. So overall, this is the inspiration information chapter. This is for the GMs to actually read through, get some inspiration for their campaigns, or if they need a planet to put a mission on, then this is where they would go. Of course, add this to the planets in the core rulebook, and you've got a ton of things to play around with. Let's talk about the Black Projects. To me, this is the meat and potatoes of the entire book. This is just more things to play around with. So one of my main critiques for the core rulebook was that you only really get xenomorphs, neomorphs, and the abominations, which I've actually never really discussed. But abominations are zombie-like people who are mutated through the motes, or the thing that creates the aliens. So here, you actually have what the other factions are doing with the information that they've come across regarding xenomorphs and all of that stuff, and what are they doing and where it's located. So for example, you have the artificial womb soldier program, which is actually already is kind of closed, but a long time ago the UA decided to clone their Marines and exclusively use them as Marines, so they would grow up in military camps and just learn all that stuff. One of the really cool ones is Project Berserker. So this is when you hook up a person to like this giant hulking machine, and they basically have to live in that machine now. It's really horrific, but really, really cool. Project Life Force and the Dark Star program are just basically making xenomorphs into pets. That's kind of what I got from it. And so there's just different types of inspiration for you as a GM to really get into and use in your campaign games. Of course, the Story of Worlds makes some use of some of the information, and actually the adventure in this book does heavily make use of some of this stuff too. So really cool stuff. So let's talk about the Frontier War. This is the adventure for the entire book for the Colonial Marines. It's also an example of how to do a military style campaign, and it's actually broken up into 2 chapters. So we'll see the specifics in the next chapter. But for the Frontier Wars, instead of a 3-act scenario, you get a series of missions, and as you go through some of these missions, you uncover what's really going on. And by the way, the missions are not linear by any means. Things are happening in the background, but after certain points, some of the stuff that really blows up. So spoiler warning if you plan on being a player for any of these missions or the overall Frontier War campaign. So the PCs do missions, go from mission to mission, and eventually they come across a conspiracy where the person that is in charge, or their leader, is actually planning a coup, which is really cool. It's just a nice little twist. So the players actually really have an important decision to make. Would they go against their orders and prevent the coup, or will they actually follow through on their leader's orders and actually participate in the coup? So a lot of different things can happen here, and this chapter is just a general overview for what happens and just all the different missions. So you get a lot of NPCs, the different factions that are actually part of this series of missions. So really very interesting. So there's a lot of different mysteries, like the border bombers. Something is going around to different colonies and black gooing the colonies, which is what I think it was David did in Alien, or he talked about in Alien Covenant, which we won't mention. Yeah, that's how we got rid of the engineers. So they've actually managed to manufacture that, or actually get access to that, and that's kind of like the overall plot for this and the Destroyer of Worlds, which we'll talk about. So let's talk about the missions. So these are the specific missions for the Frontier War. Quite honestly, this could have been like its own separate scenario, but I'm actually glad it's included here because it's definitely different than your standard 3-act cinematic scenario. Plus, you actually get to make your own characters for this. So it goes from mission to mission to gives you the rundown of what's really going on and who the major players are. And of course, in between some of these missions during downtime, you get access to what's really going on. And it's just a really long section because there's a lot of different missions here. But maps are included here, which is really cool because I do like their maps. I mean, just look at this. The Glory of the Proletariat. It's a medical frigate, which is absolutely looking pretty cool. And so it goes through each of the missions, and that's pretty much it until you get to the finale, which is you're going to some headquarters to stop the entire coup. So that's kind of all there is for this last third of the book, or maybe it's the last fourth of the book. And so, yeah, after Operation Octopus Garden, things are kind of explained a little bit. And that's actually it for this book. By the way, there is no bookmark, which is a shame, because I think between this and the core rulebook, I really think this one could have benefited from that, especially with all of the missions towards the back of the book. So let's get into my final thoughts. If you've seen my review on Alien, the core rulebook, then my opinions are basically the same. If you want more stuff for your Alien games, then this book is solid. If you want to give a military-style campaign a try, then this book is also solid. If you're looking for Alien lore, then this book definitely serves, like, up the wazoo, probably even more so than the core rulebook. It's just a different, aspect of the universe, which I've actually never been exposed to. So that was a nice treat. If you're not looking for any of the above, then you might want to pass, especially if you don't need any of the Colonial Marine stuff, because that's pretty much all there is. This is the operator's manual for the Colonial Marines. You might want to wait out for the next supplement that expands on maybe the truckers or the colonists or whatever's coming next. I think we're getting a cinematic scenario next, and that's the third one from the overall trilogy, but that's for another day. So feel free to leave a comment down below, give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and subscribe if you would like to see more. I will see you guys in the next video.